Okay, thank you all. I've been anticipating this conversation. Um, it, uh, for the microphones, you can lean in and speak to the mic so they can project across the room. And so our first question, of course, is to have each of you introduce yourselves. So your name, the organization or department you're with, your role there, and how long you've been working with AI. And we can start with start stage right.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really honored to be in this panel discussion today, and thank you so much for being here with us today. So my name is Aran Koo. I'm an associate professor of art education in the Department of Art, Design, and Art History. And this is my 7th year at Fresno State, and have been doing the research about AI and in art education context for the past 2 years. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Teresa Mendez. I'm from Clovis Community College. I'm our Academic Senate President and English instructor, and I was our distance education coordinator for 7 years. I have been leading our Academic Senate through kind of creating a policy on AI for our campus for like the last year.
Hello, my name's Carlson Herbert. I'm a current MBA student in my final semester and also work for an ag startup, marketing and sales, and working on different tools for students to use AI in work and school.
Thank you. First of all, go dogs go. Woohoo! I'm a proud alum, class of 91 and class of 93. Yeah, pleasure to be here today. My name's Brian Dvorak. I'm with the Fresno Unified School District, and I'm an educational technology specialist. And my goal, my mission, our team's mission is to basically build digital literacy within our students, but also our teachers and our support staff. And my team works closely with our curriculum and instruction team, and we work on personalizing learning within our classrooms. Pleasure to be here today. I want to thank Brad for including the K-12 voice today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nicholas Aimley. I'm an undergraduate electrical engineering student in the Laus College of Engineering here at Fresno State. I've been integrating AI into many different research projects now for the past little over 2 years.
Okay, thank you all. And so we'll get into our a few moderated questions, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A for the audience. And so the first question that I wanted to elicit to anyone who's willing to answer it is, what are the potential biases in AI algorithms, and how can we mitigate them to ensure fairness and inclusivity in educational outcomes?
So, yeah, one of the things that comes to mind when I hear that question is, first of all, algorithms. I can't speak to algorithms, proficiently. It's not something I know in depth, but what I do know is that humans write algorithms, and as you know, humans come with their own perspectives, their unique perspectives and backgrounds, and so that exposes or brings that opportunity to bring in potentially bias and narrowed perspectives, and so that to me is one of the pieces that we need to be concerned about. And a way to mitigate that is to make sure that the people working on these algorithms come from diverse backgrounds and perspectives. Another piece to it is the data that's being used, which is the data sources that AI utilizes to learn from. That data comes from a variety of sources, but when you look at, for example, OpenAI, 60% of their data that they use to train the AI comes from Common Crawl, which is an organization that collects information from public websites. And so with public websites, as we know, .edus and .orgs, typically we know have reliable information, but .coms, that's most of what's out there. .coms, as we know, can be biased. They can also have information that's not factual or correct. And so OpenAI even calls that out. They let you know that, hey, the AI might, and Dr. Kim called this out, the AI might provide information that's biased or not factual. So that's a concern. I think mitigating that is, again, we need data that comes from multiple sources and perspectives. And then we need to be able to have some ways to review the AI and how it's working. We need to vet on a regular basis to make sure it's actually working the way we want it to.
You mentioned that Common Crawl. I think Reddit is a use of a lot of great information, but any Reddit posts that had more than 2 upvotes was used as a part of training. So there's a lot of stuff out there. But I think you also mentioned something about like how this is a black box, which is it all exists. We know generally how it's trained. We know what it's trained on, but the outputs aren't deterministic. Like if it's a program, you tell it to do some math, it's going to do the math, and you're going to get a reliable output. But I think it's useful to think of AI more as like a people, not that there's sentience or anything, but that you don't always know what's going to come out. It's not always going to be reliable. It's not always good at consistent things, but it's good in other areas. So I think that just kind of goes to like, you need to be aware, even like where it was trained in. It's trained in the West. Like our views of society and culture are not going to be applicable in the same ways to somebody who's in a different continent. And it's interesting to have like one model that's supposed to be used by people all over the world of any age at any time and have answers that are applicable to them. And that's kind of unprecedented and kind of a really big ask. Like that's pretty wild. And so I think there's times that we want there to be maybe not biased, but we want different outputs depending on who's asking the question. If a kindergartner is asking a question versus somebody in college versus a researcher, the answer should be different. But I mean, there was literally a study that came out today. It was published on Bloomberg about the way that names on resumes influencing biases when you're using an AI model to rank resumes. And it was a really interesting study. You can probably Google it and find the method pretty easily. But an obvious solution to some of that is like not including names, like when you're doing this. So there's things that I think we can do. Microsoft just published a model that removes all personally identifiable information from a prompt. I think there's a lot of interesting potential there to remove things not just for security, but also to potentially remove bias. But I think there's sometimes that like it's good to have the age of the person who's asking the question. Sometimes we do want different outputs, but there are concerns with, yeah, I mean, basically anything that historically has been used to have a bias is going to also be something that's used and that comes out in some way in an AI tool.
Thank you for that. And I know Dr. Kim mentioned Amazon and how they kind of broke apart their efforts for recruitment and hiring because of some of the bias that was going on. So maybe from Dr. Mendez, what discoveries have you made in using AI that have surprised you in a good way or a bad way?
I think I've been teaching writing for 20 years at the community college system. And, my students have been using Google, right? And they have been trying to synthesize Google for a really long time. And I will say, ChatGPT or, Bing, they synthesize all of the sources much better than my students have, right? But I think this last year we were doing some scholarship essays, and we had someone read, and they said, "Oh, we're not going to give these two students scholarships. They use ChatGPT. I can tell." And I ran it through, GPT-0, and it got this score. So I ran all of the essays through GPT-0, and they all had a score. And some of the students, and I talked to some of the students, and they're like, "No, I didn't use it." And what I realized was the questions that we were asking students were just really basic, and we were getting just very generalized responses that sounded like generative AI. And so this year, we spent a lot of time and we redid all our prompts, and we redid it this year, and I talked to my readers, and they were like, all of the essays we read were so compelling. I was crying, I was laughing, and they were eliciting emotion. And so I don't know if it was like a huge surprise to me that if we write better prompts, we get better things from students. But I think there is a lot to that we have to up our game also.
There was a great man that recently taught me about foundational questions. So, so Nick, as a student, what discoveries have you made in your exploration of AI?
So, in my research, I have found generally one thing I really like about AI is the fact that you can have it continuously learning over time on constantly new responses from users. And I think that's very important because in order for these AI algorithms to be accurate enough to implement in large-scale systems, you need them to be trained very thoroughly. And in order to do that, that could take years in order to train them thoroughly enough to make them accurate almost every time. And so if you have them continuously learning as people use them, it decreases that time a little bit because part of that training time is part of the implementation time as well. Something that has worried me, or I've seen as a bit bad, is AI seems to view the world in terms of what it's been trained on and nothing more. That's all it can do. And so it classifies everything it sees, every new thing it sees, in terms of what it has been trained on. So if you trained it to recognize, say, apples and oranges, for instance, and then you put a potato in front of it, it's going to look at that potato and try to figure out which one it is, an apple or an orange. It's not capable of classifying it as a potato or as a vegetable. And so those are two things that I've gotten from my research.
Thank you. Dr. Koo, you have given us some amazing opportunities on campus to explore AI through the lens of art. So what discoveries have you made in your work?
So actually, I didn't really know much about AI. Just 2 years ago, I started this research like a 2022 spring. And the reason why I started this research because it was impacting our student and even community, like all K-12 settings. So I just wanted to be prepared a little bit better. So I started to dig into all this fear and kind of possibilities, so pros and cons, both sides. And I initiate the kind of webinar series with different scholars and artists in first, last year when I started the webinar series, I invited 5 people from California. There are great artists, great scholars who are talking about the AI. And this year I'm kind of expanding this possibility with a different background. And by doing so, I'm still learning a lot through those kind of opportunity. So when you see, normally, we saw from the keynote speech, like you can easily generate the image, like text to image, or text to even video now, film. You can really generate it in a second. But at the same time, when you look at it, like similar to just written language, like it can be boring, it can be similar, because you can instantly just generate those images, like thousands of images in a second. Like it's really, really quick but similar because the data set is limited. And again, going back to the first question, those are from the web, like it's the sources that we can get in, so it is biased and it's kind of limited. So if you put kind of prompt that generate an image which is like a left-handed person writing something, then you're gonna get the image of the people who are right-handed because it's the majority of the data that we can get. So AI doesn't really understand those kind of contexts. That's why it's really important for us as an educator or as a people, human being, to give the kind of really great prompt that what we just share. But at the same time, we also have a bias, right? So we have our certain background, certain perception. So our input in the process of it is also biased, but also going back to our president's point, like it can be really personalized based on your own input. You can create something different. And I highly encourage my students to go a bit farther than just generating image out of generative AI, because they really need to give a bit of personal touch as an input, putting the text, but as an output, they can add the layer as a personalized layer through their kind of creation. So there are many really like a similar context that AI, I don't know if it can be really unbiased. That's why it's really important to have this kind of conversation as a whole. Like, I think one of the question that we wanted to address here is like mitigate. How can we mitigate? We just share and give the opportunity for people to think about it and to have a conversation about it as like what we are doing here. So I think it's really great start to have this conversation here. Thank you.
And Brian, I'm curious from your perspective in your pivotal role at a K-12, like what discoveries have you made and how has that kind of moved into the different campuses?
Yeah, and so I just wanted to add to what you were saying, which is, you know, part of ways to mitigate this information that students and teachers are getting is we need to come up with policies, we need to come up with recommendations for schools, for teachers, and it needs to be intentional. It needs to be implemented across the school so that all teachers and students understand the problem with the data. Because if it just goes, and it makes me think of the early days of the internet, right? We went through this when internet became a thing in schools, and we started teaching students, right? Vet your sources, look at multiple sources, right? Don't rely on one. And so it's a similar thing with this. We just need to make sure that everyone has that awareness, and we need to socialize it in our classrooms. But another thing we're looking at, I am working with teachers at one of our high schools to think about policy and recommendations and best practices for utilizing AI with students and for teachers. And so we're kind of doing the groundwork to start exploring different tools. We're also, something we have to look at is student access, because we're a Microsoft district. So Microsoft Copilot is a very big tool that we're starting to show teachers and get their feedback on. But students have to be 18 or older to utilize it. And this is Microsoft's policy. All the other tools out there where if a student needs to create an account, they have to be 13 or older and have parent permission, which has been a COPA policy for many years. But those are the things that we're looking at, and we want to put together a plan, and we want to make sure it gets socialized across our system.
Thank you. And so for the next question, Carlson, I'm wondering, how do you perceive the impact of AI on your learning experience and future job prospects?
Yeah. I think as I've thought about so I started my MBA and then took a break for a year and a half, and a lot happened in that year and a half. Like, it started using image generation tools in like the summer of 2022, and then ChatGPT came out, and so I was working in a startup at the time, and so it was just use these tools. I kind of worked alone in a room, and so I figured out using this stuff, and then coming back to school and thinking about, now how do I use this as a part of learning? I understand how to use this in work and in career, and I think one of the things that I've discovered, particularly for me personally, just the least fun part of school is online homework. Like, it just isn't that, I don't enjoy that part. And I found that I can really enjoy it because while with my phone, I can literally pull out the ChatGPT app or a million others and take a picture of the screen, and I could get the answers instantly. Or just start using, like, having a conversation and read the screen and get answers. Like, it's crazy easy. But at the same time, like, learning is also way easier. Like, I can break down, finance is not my strongest suit. I can break down these concepts in ways that make sense to me, whether it's like at a high school level, because sometimes that's necessary, or a lemonade stand, or have conversations, not just like answer a question, but like start to have conversations about topics that I would have with my professor if it was one-on-one, but it's 11 p.m. at my house. Like, so I think there's a lot of potential for having conversations about topics. And I think it really does make like learning, especially like personalized learning, easier. So.
And Brian, for students in the K through 12 system, how have you seen them kind of interact with it at that younger age?
Oh, they're having a ball with it. Yeah, they're utilizing it to help them write. They're utilizing it to generate images. And we had a frustration when, you know, ChatGPT came about in November 2022. Just a couple months into that, we started to get many, many calls from teachers calling our IT department asking, please block this ChatGPT. And so, you know, our response was that, well, we could block it, but students find ways around content filters. But also, Gen AI is now, it's integrated into all kinds of tools out there that teachers are already using and students. And so one of the things we've been modeling is the use of Gen AI within tools like Padlet. Padlet is a common tool that's used in K-12, so students can go on and share ideas in a digital shared space. Well, that has generative AI built in to generate images and text. Canva is another tool very commonly used to create multimedia. And so we're showing where this can be a place where the students can leverage the AI, but also have that guidance from their teacher in a place. And the students don't have to create accounts, right? They can get into a Padlet and access the AI and participate.
And Nick, how has AI impacted your learning experience, and do you have any thoughts about the impact it might have on the job market for you?
Yeah. So for learning, I think that's where the strong suit of AI really shines through. It is great at repackaging material that is out there in whatever way is most suited for that current situation. So if someone learns in a certain way and no professors of their classes are teaching it that way to them, they can have AI model the information from that course and present it in a different way, and that might hit their brain differently and increase their learning. I think that definitely works for me at times, and so I think it's going to have a positive effect on my learning. My future job prospects, I think it's maybe a bit more detrimental in that area. It's at least when you can use something like ChatGPT to create an application for a job or optimize your resume. I think it raises the bar for everyone, because then everyone is able to have a professional application or cover letter to any job they want to, at the click of a button. So I think it's going to be a bit detrimental in that way.
Okay. Thank you for that. It's the first time that I heard students kind of talk about some of those resume optimization possibilities as a kind of a fear of like, what does that mean for me on the job market? Dr. Mendez, how can we ensure that the use of AI in teaching and research upholds academic integrity and ethical standards?
So I think there's a couple of ways that we need to really kind of approach this in our classrooms. I think one, we need to understand that it is something that is there, and it is something that students need to know how to use. I think along those lines that each instructor needs to develop policies about what is an acceptable use in my course. Can you use Gen AI as a brainstorming tool? Is it okay to use it to help me make an outline? Can I use it at the end of my paper to create a reverse outline, right? I think that the second approach is teachers need to integrate it into their teaching practices, right? How can we use this as a way to improve student writing, as a coach, as a tutor, and maybe it's like my debate coach. I'm writing an argument essay, and I'm going to put my argument into it, and then it's going to argue back to me, and then I have to argue back using my sources, right? And then I'm going to have my students like give me that entire output, right, that is there. And so I think that is really important to look at that. I was reviewing a class for kind of an online certification the other day, and it was an introduction to biology course. And every single course objective throughout the week was either identify or describe. Identify, describe, identify, describe. Every single lab, every single homework assignment. And I think we have to expect more out of our students. And I think we have to look higher on that Bloom's taxonomy to say, how do we apply? How do we create? How do we analyze? And so I don't think we're doing our jobs if we're not expecting kind of a higher quality product for students. And then finally, I think we need to focus on process and not product. So, if everyone can generate an amazing 14-page essay, right, in 20 minutes with just a few little prompts, what's the purpose, right? We need to teach our students why they're engaging in the work that they are. Jonathan Brennan, he does kind of like on-course conferences. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of him. He kind of talked about approaching students from kind of this concept of neuroplasticity, and that engaging in the work is what actually develops your brain and helps you learn, right? This is not a checkbox, and this is not what we're doing. And so I think really, and there was a question earlier that was asked about like, how do we get students away from just like wanting the answer? And I spent years in tutorials, so like I completely feel your pain. And I think part of that is, as instructors, we have to require process and not just look at final product. And I think that really changes the way we teach and what we do in our classrooms. But I think that's really the only way we're gonna get students to focus on the process and not that output. And there are studies out there, right, that if the stakes are really high, students are much more likely to cheat. They're much more likely to turn to these tools to do the work for them because they don't wanna fail. And so how can we kind of change that paradigm?
And Dr. Koo, what concerns or thoughts do you have about AI in the arts when it comes to ethics and responsibility?
So actually, I studied the research about AI. I'm not AI researcher, but I was not AI researcher, but I studied it because there are fear. Like we don't really know much about it, and it's so fast, so fastly evolving. Like every day, there are news about AI, and it feels like we are behind, left behind. We don't really know. We cannot follow those kind of pace. So that's why I started to learn from the experts who have been doing this research for the past already 20 years. Some of them are 25 years. So by hearing from them and by creating those space for students to think about both party, like a benefit and kind of maybe pros and cons, both part of what AI can do and what cannot really do, what is the limitation and so on. It really helped our students to think about what they have feared about was not really based on some abstract concept of AI. So what we really want to do in this kind of context, we really want to embrace the opportunity, like talk about those different possibility and ethic issues, like especially in art field, like a copyright issue, because all those images are from like somebody else generated those images. We just enter those images. Sometimes we don't even know who are the artists because they don't really credit them. So it's really important to kind of be aware and have this conversation upfront in the school setting. It can be K-12, it can be university setting. Here is where educator comes into the play, that make the space, just encourage the student to have this kind of conversation so they are aware how we can use AI ethically, how we can kind of approach and understand the benefit and limitation of the current technology that they are really exposed to day-to-day basis. So having this kind of like a space like this and having these kind of guidances as an educator are really pivotal, not only in art but also general education field. So.
Carlson, you shared some interesting thoughts about how you use AI personally to learn. I'm wondering, are there any ways that you can also kind of project forward and see either how you might use AI to learn differently in the future, or how other students, or maybe in a specific domain, it might have some potential there?
Yeah, I think personalization's a big part of it. And I think there's a lot of benefits to first understanding, like, well, whatever the tools look like, they need to be tools that have conversations, not just provide answers. I think a few people have mentioned like students that just like, you even talked about like students just synthesizing Google. Like that's not engaging with anything, and that's not really like learning anything. So I think whatever the approaches are, I don't know quite what the future tools will look like. I know they'll be personalized. I know hopefully they'll require students to have to think through their questions, to ask questions and then get a response and then ask more questions and get another response and like work through this process. That was something that I was reminded of when I'm not sure who it was, but was sharing about tutoring, and you're like guiding these students through things. These students, I'm a student also, but like it's a journey that doesn't have a clear end always. And so I think it's really important just to like view it as a journey, and AI can make it really fun. I don't know, I think I used to work with like an after school program with under-resourced kids, and I just think about like how much they just love Fortnite. It's like, well, okay, so how do we like have examples for them of learning that include Fortnite or whatever thing that they love? And so for me, I like try to include things that I like when I'm trying to learn. And I think that's really fun when it's personal, and if I'm learning something that's not in the business field, how do I'll say like, I work for an ag startup. Like, explain this to me in a way that makes sense to me. Or even I'll just be like, explain this to me in a way that I'll never forget. And so it's just like super clear and uses different techniques like repetition or practical examples or whatever to help me kind of lock it in. And even just that process of conversation, I think is important. So I don't know quite what the total future will be like, but those are the things that like I'm trying to explore in my own learning and try to figure out I don't know if there's always like a structure that's like, this is how students should do this, but I think it has to involve, this is something Glenn, a guy who's here, and I have talked about, like it has to involve more than just getting an answer, it has to involve a conversation. So I think that's a key thing.
Okay.
Can I add to that?
And,
Real quick?
Yes.
So one of the big things when you talked about, that it's a conversation, one of the things that really excites me about Gen AI, especially generative text, is the application for students, because we talk about, right, the you get out of AI what you put into it. And so you have to be extremely descriptive, right, and precise. And so like for English teachers, that's huge. That means this is going to help my students be really good descriptive writers. And so that's a piece that really excites me.
Thank you. And the question earlier is from Dr. Sangarico, who's the director of the Learning Center. Nick, so for you, what do you see coming in terms of personalized learning in the future?
So for in the engineering field specifically, when I'm programming, right, different codes, the term copilot is tossed around a lot. When referring to AI assistants, it can be very helpful, right? It helps in terms of English, right, to improve writing skills, but it also helps in engineering fields in that way, right? It can, rather than having someone look over your shoulder and having to try to correct every error in, you know, a 1,000-line code script, right? You just have an AI tool do it with you as you're moving through. I think that can be extremely beneficial in multiple fields.
Thank you. And then for the students on the panel, what are some, we talked about the worry of the job market. What are some other worries about AI that you have?
Okay, so some worries for me. So definitely, it seems AI is being rapidly integrated into everything. And everyone is eager to integrate it into everything that they can, you know, imagine it being in. And though that is helpful, it is good to think about the implications of it, think about where it's important to have a human's input and where it's fine to have AI input. So maybe the progress in terms of development in AI is wonderful, but in integration, maybe it needs to be slowed down a little bit. Another thing, so AI data sets and algorithms, a lot of it is open source. And the great thing about open source development is you get a lot of perspectives on how best to improve an algorithm, how best to improve an AI system. But when you're sharing all of this data around, you can end up possibly sharing around sensitive data sets or data sets that were compiled from, you know, illegally acquired material, right? And that's something where maybe a more closed source system would be helpful, right? So going forward, everything being so open source can be a bit of a worry for me. And then bias, of course, in a situation where like AI was being used as an admissions helpful tool to see what students should be admitted to a certain institution, who should not, and it's analyzing based on, say, GPA and extracurricular activities. You know, if all of the data that's trained on is from high-achieving students of a certain demographic, then its output might favor students in the high-achieving category of that certain demographic and not consider other high-achieving students from different demographics. And so eliminating that bias in your data sets and in your algorithms is very important.
Thank you. Carlson?
Yeah, there's a few things that concern me. The first is when tools are something that's taboo, then they become something that's more likely to be abused. And so when something, though, is like really public and is used a lot, it becomes super boring. And I think that's a really good place for AI to be. Because like the first time you use it, it's like, wow, I just generated a poem about math or something. Like, I don't know, whatever random thing came to your mind. It's like the equivalent of Hello World. Like you write programming for the first time, you always do Hello World. You interact with an AI tool for the first time, it's always like a poem. And I think like then you keep using it and then it becomes kind of boring and it's not just like exciting for it to do everything for you anymore. So I think that's a really important place to get to. And I think it's concerning when you're not at that place, because there can be fear as a student, like, do I talk to my professor about this? Am I just going to get in trouble? Or whatever. I think I also have a lot of concerns about what is meaningful especially in work, when not too far down the line, when almost everything that I do, AI can do better. So where is and I mean, even like in education, it's like, okay, well, the goal is eventually, like, as a student, to get a job and like do something and make money or whatever. And it's like, well, what am I supposed to do when AI can already do all this stuff better than me? What do I contribute? I think actually you mentioned this like importance of like the things that are personal to us, our experience, our perspective, and that kind of thing. So I think that's really, really important to bring to this. So that's something I'm excited about. But still, it's really discouraging. I think it can be really scary. I talked to some other students, and their thoughts about the future with AI were not really defined. But it was a lot of these general things about job, or even just like, I'm in Fresno, AI is probably going to take all the jobs out of Fresno because it's not like a tech hub or whatever. This is from somebody who's doing some computer science stuff. And so I think those are, some of my concerns.
Thank you for that. Dr. Koo, how can students be involved in the development and governance of AI policies and practices within the institution?
So actually, it's a great question. Like as we heard from keynote speech today, there is a limitation as a faculty member or staff or educator because we know what we know. So we need really the input from students who are experiencing things differently. So we really need to have conversation with the student, of course, and the governance part. Like if they don't share what they learn or what they think or what they experience, it's different from what they hear from their teacher. So it's completely different. So students should be the center of this, all the policy development, and also the sharing this importance of and significance of this different implication in the school setting, different contexts, yeah.
And Dr. Mendez, what are your thoughts?
I think there's sort of two levels that we have to think about. I think there's like the larger participatory governance level of, are we involving students enough in those conversations that we're having as we develop, college-wide guidelines. And then I think there's also our classroom where we need to have really frank conversations also about how will we use this. And so maybe I don't develop my syllabus policy until I talk with my class about it and say, how do you use it? This is sort of what I envision. This is what I need from you. And make students feel a part of that policy making. And that would be something that would have to happen every single semester.
And Brian, what about some of our younger students? How can we involve them in governance?
Yeah, so we have a student advisory council that we can meet with to get input. And so that's something the team I'm working with will be bringing them in and getting their feedback. But another piece is, and this is something we coach our students on within personalized learning, is we need to provide opportunities on a regular basis for students to reflect on the process of their learning, not just academically, and so with artificial intelligence, when we start exposing them to these tools, is asking them to reflect, how did you feel about this tool and what it gave you, how it helped you, right? And continue to reflect and collect feedback.
Thank you. Before we get to the Q&A, can we please give our panel a round of applause? And so now we'll be taking questions. I do want to say my colleague, Dr. Koo, has to get to some faculty obligations. So if you have any questions pertaining to art or AI at Fresno State, please ask those first so we can get her wisdom before she exits.
Thank you.
I'm from K-12, so Brian, not to exclude you, but we're in the same area. The question really kind of two parts. The first part was actually for the students, what we can do from the K-12 part to have you ready to be doing what you're doing now. And then the second part is actually for Dr. Ku and Mendez. What would you expect from the K-12 side coming into your classrooms? What knowledge can we prepare them for? Like, we do all kinds of stuff, which is great, but we don't hit every kid all the time. From an AI point of view, what can we be planning for to get ready for them to walk into your classrooms? And then from the student side, what would you guys wish that we told you or showed you or taught you before you got here?
Because of this kind of buzz, kind of word and AI, the kind of general impression about AI, many students have certain perception about this artificial intelligence. And so when I addressed this topic in my class last year, many students reflected that they really didn't really know what artificial intelligence means, and in the art context and also education context. So again, having those just like we are also learning as we go because it's developing so fast, right? So we cannot be an expert at all. So just open the space and have this kind of conversation, what AI means to you. Like just having this conversation and just share different understanding among different people with a different background will help. And by doing so, my own student, they said their pre-perception changed so much because they just learn about it through media, which was kind of bombarded with a certain marketing pressure. And using AI, if you don't use AI, it can be a bit like you are not really following the trend. So having this kind of conversation and just embrace the fear and think about the possibility together. So the collaboration piece is really important, like working together with a different background. Like they will help us to understand how we can move forward within the kind of situation. So yeah.
I will say, just to add on to kind of the image of AI, I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, and someone said, we need Hollywood to make movies that depict AI a different way, right? Because what's now out there is like Terminator, and so there's just this constant fear that it's sort of going to take over society. And I was listening to something, and they're like, if you're not asking it a question, it's not actually thinking anymore, right? So it's not alive while you're not there. So I think a general understanding, right, of how these large language models work, where their information comes from. I think we can take a lot from what our librarians have done since like the beginning of the internet, right? What is information literacy? And I think that's kind of what it comes down to, and how do we evaluate sources, and whether that's checking against like multiple different kinds of AI or information we already know or research that we're also doing outside of the generative AI. I think those are kind of two ways that I think will definitely prepare students as they come to college.
What I'm hearing is more boring AI. That's I was just thinking about, like, it's probably whatever level of understanding a K-12 student has of AI, whether it's just, here's a thing for me to get answers so that I can get out of work, or this is something that's a tool, it's still something that's like, I mean, like, students that can barely read have access to something that, like, a knowledge and understanding of things that they would have had to read and, like, I don't know, be done a lot more school and been a lot more mature to be able to, like, comprehend and synthesize and apply in some way. And I don't know if it feels really scary to, like, I just think about, like, again, like, what do I bring to this if this tool can do everything for me? What's even the importance of me learning something? So I think those are, I don't have the answer to that. That's just a thing I've been thinking a lot about. And I guess, like, that posture of use, like, is this just a thing we don't talk about, or is this a thing we talk about? And I think it's fun to see, like, what unique things students can bring to it, even in a K-12 thing, because then they're already thinking about, what are my foundational questions and that kind of thing. So I thought that was really good.
Something to add. So I think it's important, especially when exposing young students to AI, to instill the positive uses that they can use it for, as opposed to enforcing the negative ones that they shouldn't do. If you expose them more to all of its capabilities, what they might be able to grow up to be able to do with it, that's more what they're going to be focusing on, and then they'll be able to, in themselves and in the people around them, foster a culture of AI ethics, ethical use of it. And that's very important, I think, especially at a younger age.
Any other questions?
Before Dr. Koo leaves, I have a question about art. I find talking about art and the use of AI challenging because of collages like Joseph Cornell and Duchamp, taking something, appropriating something from the world and putting it into a gallery. How are you facing this challenge with art students that are trying to think conceptually about the use of AI and not thinking about, oh, I need to let my audience know exactly where that urinal came from that I stole from a construction site and putting it into a gallery, or where that bird came from that I've used in a collage. Anyways, I'm very curious about this because artists, Andy Warhol and Duchamp and Joseph Cornell and so many others appropriate and steal and share without necessarily having to share where they found that information from.
So actually, there are many lawsuits happening because illustrator, their work has been just taken like from internet, and they are not credited, they are not compensated. So they are just kind of like their own credit outcomes are used somewhere without really knowing. So it's really kind of tricky question and tricky kind of situation now we are living in. So that's why it's really important for our students and us to have this kind of conversation about ethical issue and ethical approach to use AI in our education sector. And I want to just share one of the example that I invited Korean duo artist group last year, and they are showing me some of their art project. And the title of the project was a non-dance dance. So it was the kind of collaboration with the choreographer, the dancer, who perform their dance movement, and AI is detecting whether it's a dance or not. So if AI detect the movement, the dancer's movement as dance, then the light turns off. So we can only see the dance that we frame as a dance, which is not recognized as dance by AI. So what I want to say is AI, kind of collaborating with AI, can push the boundary of what we can do in terms of arts or other field. So for my own perspective, this can be really unique opportunity for us to be more creative, to be more inspiring using the current status of technology. So
just following up on that, using AI.
Microphone is coming to you.
Thanks. So just to follow up on that, using AI to become more creative, I think one of the real benefits of AI is lateral thinking. So what about using AI for the art students to teach them to become better entrepreneurs and how to launch their own Amazon store, or if they want to use art to benefit rural villages in Congo? Do you know what I mean? So rather than just looking at a silo of AI to generate art, what about using AI to look at the world and solve problems in the world?
I don't know if I should answer, but so I had the conversation this morning, like AI don't really distinguish whether it's art or science. Like they see this as a data. So in the opposite side, there will be a lot of opportunity to collaborate within the different sector. And that's why, again, the educator, we can be really great people to guide them to do those kind of collaboration with the different expertise and different backgrounds. So I'm gonna stop here.
Yes. President?
So it's not every day that I get to talk to another writing instructor, so I'm going to take my chance. When I was in the classroom teaching writing, I would teach my students that the one sentence that they turned into me, that turned into the one paragraph, that turned into the one essay, was their DNA. It was reflective of who they were. No one else could write that one sentence, that one paragraph, that one essay. It was as distinct as who they were because that's what the process of writing is. With AI now in the foreground, what happens to the creative process of writing? What happens to the creative process of identity in writing? And are we going to, in the future, be teaching our students to become editors instead of creators?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, and I think it kind of speaks to what are we teaching in a writing class often. You know, in literary theory, there's kind of this idea that there is no original author, right? You know, yes. And I think in some ways, right, that is AI. But I do think, and I think this is one of the things we have to talk to our students about, that it could definitely have that effect of homogenizing voices, especially if, you know, we're using it in a particular way or giving it, you can tell AI, like, you know, give it some information and like write this as as a social media prompt for whatever, right? And it'll completely change the tone of the writing. And so I think, that would give us just like more time in class, right? To really like delve into what is your voice, what is your tone. But I do want to say, I think for especially a lot of, multiple language learners, that it also has the ability to kind of, sort of get rid of some of those grammatical errors that they have been judged for, and to even that playing field a bit as well, right? So I think there are good and bad to that.
And before we see our panelists off, we do want to gift them a $25 gift card for our Kindle bookstore. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for your wisdom.
Thank you.
Before I hand the mic over, there is this flyer on the table. So for folks that are here on campus often, we are going to have a series of workshops coming up in the next couple weeks. So please, if you want to continue this conversation, continue exploring, go ahead and RSVP.
Thank you again to the panelists. Let's give them one more round of applause. Thank you.